What if there was a way of winning a free piece in almost every opening that you play, or against every opening that you face? You know, I believe that chess was meant to be fun. What I'm about to show you is the easiest way of mastering any opening. Now let me give you a little disclaimer before I continue. The tricks that I'm about to show you do work 100% against opponents that are unprepared, and even against prepared opponents who are just in a rush. In this video, I'm only looking at 6 openings for white in which you can apply the same or similar tricks in order to win a free piece very early in the opening. And I mean 6 of the most common openings for white. So let's get started. Number 1, with the Ponziani opening. The Ponziani opening is where white begins with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 by black, c3, the Ponziani opening. Now, why developing pawn to c3 on move number 3 instead of playing knight to c3? Let's see. Its plan is to support a letter d4 and set several traps for unprepared opponents, but it doesn't pose much of a problem for the defense if black knows the lines. However, the most played move in this position is knight to f6, after which you should play pawn to d4, leaving the pawn on e4 hanging. Oh wait, is that even a free pawn for nothing? What if black takes the free pawn on e4? Well, in this position, I recommend that after knight takes on e4, you go d5. Then in most cases, you are going to see black players responding with a move knight e7. Now, I'm not just speaking my mind. This is the top most played move even on lichess. So after knight to e7, I recommend that you take immediately on e5 with your knight. So in most cases, believe it or not, you are going to see black responding with a move pawn to d6 because they are not happy with your knight on e5. And again, this is the second most played move according to the lichess database. So here I recommend that you play bishop b5 check, pawn to c6 is forced, and that's what you're going to see most of your opponents playing. D takes on c6, b takes on c6 is forced, and after knight takes on c6, you can see that you are forking the queen and the knight at the same time. Here it's either black takes our knight on c6 and lose his free knight on e4, or play queen to b6 and lose his right to castle very early in the opening. For example, if black takes on c6 with his knight, we are going to play bishop takes on c6 with check, forking 3 pieces at the same time, the king, the rook, and the knight on e4. So bishop d7 is forced, after which you are going to capture the knight on e4 and be a piece up. But instead of knight takes on c6, what if black plays queen to b6, attacking the bishop? Well, that is very simple. Here you are going to retreat your knight back to the d4 square, checking black's king with your bishop, which is on b5. And bishop d7 by black is forced in this position, after which you should play bishop takes on d7 with check, then king takes on d7, and black in this position has lost the right to castle. Black will be forced to play the rest of the game with his king on the center, which is obviously bad. So that was in the Ponziani opening. Number 2, again with the Ponziani opening. Now, this time white starts with e4, e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, knight to c6, c3, the Ponziani opening. In this position, I said knight to f6 by black is the most played move, yes, after which you should play pawn to d4, attacking the e5 pawn right away. Now in this position, black is now afraid to take on e4 because of the line that I just showed you previously. Sometimes you're going to see black taking on d4 with this e pawn, but that's not much of a stretch because we're going to push the pawn on e4 to the e5 square, and then if knight comes on e4, we are going to play queen e2, attacking black's knight on e4, and life goes on. But the third most played move in this position according to the lichess database is pawn to d6 by black, after which you should play bishop e2, which is the move that I like playing. I have played this move myself even in classical tournaments, believe it or not. And my opponent thought I blundered my e4 pawn since I played bishop to e2 very fast, and so he wasted no time and took on e4 without realizing that that's a very terrible blunder, because now I played pawn to d5 and black was forced to play knight to e7, after which I gave him a check on f4, forking the king and the knight, hence winning a free knight on e4. So when you're playing blitz chess, for example, I recommend that you play this move bishop to e2 very fast. Most of your opponents are going to think as if it's a mouse slip, thinking you wanted to put the bishop on d3. That's real psychology in chess, and that's how you're going to win a free knight in just 7 moves. Oh, wait a second. You don't always have to play bishop to e2 for this trick to work. Sometimes you can be more obvious by playing pawn to d5, so that if this knight goes back to e7, you play bishop g5 attacking the knight on f6. And as you can see, the plan is very simple. You are intending to capture the knight on f6, doubling up black's pawns along the f file. If knight to g6 by black, you just play bishop to b5 check, bishop d7 by black will be forced, after which you are going to take the bishop, the queen taking on d7 will be forced, and it will be up to you to take the knight on f6, doubling black's pawns along the f file, or maybe just play something else. The funny thing is that in this position, the second most played move is knight takes on e4, again which loses a piece in one move after queen a4 check, forking the king and the knight. Plug this position on Lichess before criticizing, and you will testify that what I'm saying is true. You will discover that even 2200s, 2300s, and 2400s have been trapped in this position before. Okay, let's go to the next. Number 3, against the Sicilian defense. Wait a second. How can we even win a free piece against the Sicilian defense in the opening stage? So here white begins with pawn to e4, c5 by black, the Sicilian defense, knight to f3, a natural move, pawn to d6, which oftentimes leads to the Najdorf variation. In this position, you know the Sicilian very well, the most played move is pawn to d4, after which black takes, you take with your knight, knight to c3, boring. Instead of all that, I recommend that you play pawn to c3. This is not a weird move, it is played even at the top level. Magnus Carlsen also plays this. Here, white aims to block black's dark square bishop from the long diagonal and support a d4 advance. Play can transpose into an Alpine variation, and I've seen a lot of super grandmasters playing this move, so it is not a weird move. It can be played even in classical games. So after pawn to c3, the most played move by black is knight to f6, simply attacking the pawn on e4. The other long-term idea by black is to play bishop to g4, pinning the knight on f3 to the queen. But in this position, I recommend that you quickly play bishop to e2. Immediately you play this move, black will be suspicious. Even if he doesn't know what is going on in this position, he will fail to take your pawn on e4 because he thinks there is a trap. By the way, if black takes on e4, you have the same trap, queen a4 check, forking the king and the knight. So anyways, black won't take this pawn even if he doesn't know what is happening, and that's why you're going to see a Sicilian player responding with a natural move, knight to c6, a developing move, after which I recommend that you play pawn to d4. Now at this point in time, a Sicilian player who is not prepared will be like, this is crazy, why is he even giving me the free pawn on e4? And so they won't even waste time to capture it, and to my surprise, I discovered that on Lichess, this is the second most played move. And I mean, 2600s and 2700s rated chess players have fallen victim of this trap. In this same position, your opponent thinks by taking on e4, they are also keeping an eye on the c5 square. For example, if you take with your pawn, they will happily grab this pawn on c5 with their knight. But this is not what you're intending to do, because right now you're going to play pawn to d5, attacking the knight on c6. And the most played move in this position is knight to e5. Even though you can still go queen f4 check, winning the knight, I recommend that you capture that knight on e5, d takes on e5, and then boom, queen f4 check, forking the king and the knight. Once again, just like in the Ponziani opening. Again, that's how you can win a free piece right away in the opening. Okay, this was number 3. Let's go to the next one. Number 4, against the famous Gioco Piano, or Gioco Piano, whatever you may call it. So the Gioco Piano is where white begins with pawn to e4, e5 by black, knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, knight to c6, defending the pawn on e5, bishop c4, eyeballing the f7 square. Here, the Gioco Piano is where black responds with a move bishop to c5, and in this position, I want you to pay attention. Even though you can play the most common move, knight to c3, which I do not recommend, I suggest that you go castle short. After which you're going to see black responding with a move knight to f6, attacking the pawn on e4. It is in this position where I recommend the move pawn to d4 right away. Now in this position, there are 3 pieces that can take our pawn on d4, out of which only one is the correct response. And this is the line where you can force black to give up his bishop pair very early in the opening. I remember covering this line in my last video on how to take advantage of the weak f7 and f2 pawns. Here, if black takes with the wrong piece, for example, pawn takes on d4, we are going to play e5, attacking the knight on f6. And in this position, there are only 5 responses that black can play, out of which only one is the best response. And that's what we want to see, because we love seeing best responses. So instead of black retreating his knight in this position, black plays pawn to d5, attacking our bishop on c4. Here we are not going to take the pawn on d5 with %. Instead, I recommend that you take the knight on f6. If black takes our bishop on c4, we go rook e1 check, bishop e6 is forced. And in this position, I want you to remember this, very important. Do not take the pawn on g7 because you will activate rook g8, indirectly eyeballing your g2 square. So instead of taking the pawn on g7, I recommend that you go knight g5, attacking the bishop on e6. Now in this position, most advanced players have tried the move queen to d5. Well, the problem with queen to d5 is that this move forces the black queen to come out so early in the opening, which isn't what black was prepared for. For example, after queen to d5, we may go knight c3, attacking the queen on d5. And note that black cannot take our knight on c3 because we are going to take the free queen, since the bishop on e6 is pinned to the king by our rook. Which is why after knight g5 attacking the bishop on e6, you won't see many of your opponents responding with a move queen to d5. Instead, they will go queen takes on f6. The problem again with this move is that black loses immediately to knight takes on e6. Note that the queen cannot take on e6 because there is a rook. F takes on e6 is forced, after which we are going to play queen h5 check, forking the king and the bishop this time. Now here I should mention that there is no any real way of protecting the bishop on c5. And believe it or not, I had this same position in a classical match where my opponent surprised me with a move queen to g6, blocking the check, forgetting that I can still go rook takes on e6 with check. So after king d7, I captured the queen on g6, h takes on g6, and again I took the bishop on c5. And that's how black lost the game in this position. So when I'm showing you these traps, it's not that I'm just making these things up. I have real life experiences and they do work 100%. Okay, so that was in the Gyoko piano max range attack. So let's go to the next one. The next one is against the Scandinavian defense. Even though I covered the line that I'm about to show you in most of my previous videos, let me just cover it anyways. So after pawn to e4, pawn to d5 by black, the Scandinavian defense, here you play knight to f3, a developing move. And so I bet most of your opponents are going to take on e4, after which you should play knight to g5, attacking the pawn on e4. Now in my previous video, I covered the move knight to f6, which holds on to this pawn on e4. But the top engine move in this position is bishop to f5, which also happens to be the second most played move according to the Lichess database. So again, in my previous video, I recommended the move knight to c3 in this position. But since we are looking at ways in which we can win our opponent's pieces very early in the opening, here I'll recommend that you play queen to e2, attacking the pawn on e4 twice with your knight and your queen. And here, believe it or not, most of your opponents are going to hold on to this pawn with the move knight to f6, since it is also a developing move and it looks natural. After which, I suggest that you go right away queen to b5 check, forking the king, the bishop, and also the pawn on b7. Now in this position, knight bd7 is the third most played move according to the Lichess database, which immediately loses the bishop on f5. Queen d7 is the second most played move, which immediately loses the b7 pawn. And bishop d7 is the top most played move according to the Lichess database, which can lead to a fast checkmate if black is not careful. For example, Let's say after knight bd7, this bishop is hanging, and so we take it for free. If not knight bd7, black can also play queen d7, after which you should play queen takes on b7, attacking the rook on a8. Here, there's nothing that black can do apart from just giving up that rook on a8, but you will see them most of the time going queen c6, thinking they are indirectly protecting the rook on a8, after which you should unleash the move bishop b5, pinning the queen on c6 to the king on e8. And that's how black loses his queen in just 7 moves. Black in this position can also try bishop back to d7, after which I recommend that you still take on b7, attacking the rook on a8. Now the right continuation here for black is to play knight to c6, but for the unknown reason, you're going to see most of your opponents responding with a move bishop to c6, indirectly protecting the rook on a8 and attacking our queen on b7, after which you're going to unleash the move again bishop to b5, pinning this bishop to the king. And it is funny how most black players here respond with a move queen to d7, because right now we are going to take that bishop on c6 and still attacking the rook on a8. After, let's say, queen takes on c6, renewing the threat, here we just met black in 9 moves. So that's how you can win a free piece in the Scandinavian line. Okay, that was number 5 against the Scandinavian defense, and now we are looking at number 6 against the Pec defense. So let me give you a little disclaimer. Sometimes when I'm showing you these traps, I do not mean to say you're going to be winning games just like this, but the whole lesson here is that similar move orders can be spotted in different positions. And sometimes it's just advantageous to give your opponents a hard time to think. So the Pec defense is where white begins with pawn to e4, d6 by black, d4 by white, knight to f6 by black, attacking our pawn on e4, knight c3, defending the pawn on e4, then g6 by black, bishop to g5 in this position is what I recommend. Here, believe it or not, most of your opponents are going to fianchetto their bishop on g7, after which I recommend that you play pawn to e5, attacking the knight on f6 and also provoking the pawn on d6. So in this position, the topmost played move is d takes on e5, because black is thinking that when you take the pawn, it's going to take your queen, which is not recommended in the opening. But that's what we want, because now we are going to take this pawn, and after black takes our queen on d1, we are going to take back with the rook. The knight is still under attack, so black has to do something, attacking the pawn on e5 with the knight and the bishop. And in this position, I recommend that you play the calm move pawn to h3, attacking the knight on g4. Knight takes on e5 is forced, and when you look at this position, it looks like black is doing well. But after just one move, knight to d5, black can pack his bag and go home, because this is already winning for white. There's nothing that black can do to stop us from capturing on the c7 square and win the rook on a8. Here Stockfish says black should castle short. That's the only way to continue. But you're going to see most of your opponents responding with a move knight to s6, which is the second most played move according to the Lichess database. And believe it or not, 2600s, 2500s, 2400s, 2300s have all fallen victim of this trap in this same position. So I'm not just making this stuff up. So after knight on s6, I recommend that you right away take on s6 with your bishop, and then after b takes on s6, which is the topmost played move according to the Lichess database, here you go knight takes on c7, check, forking the king and the rook. Now here it looks like we just want to win a free piece again, because the black king cannot go to d8, but that's not what we are intending to do, because right now we have a better move, rook d8, checkmate. Now you guys, the traps that I just showed you are 100% real. I have played them myself against strong players, and I've had so many wonderful victories with these same traps. Okay, and that's how you win your opponent's free pieces very early in the opening, in various openings, and against various defenses. And that's it for today. In the next video, I'll show you 6 different openings for black, where you can also be winning a free piece right away in the opening.